For everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down, a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to cast away, a time to rend and a time to sow, a time to keep silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war, a time for peace. For everything there is a season, and a time for every matter under heaven. When you look down over that particular list, you're suddenly aware that many of those things happen to us with almost no regard to our own existence. We're born with almost no will of our own. And for many of us, we die without having the control to choose the date or the place or the time. But a large number of those things are things over which we have tremendous control. We can choose when we're going to be happy and move towards those things which make us happy. We can understand the need to be sad and move towards those things which are sad. We can enjoy our own existence only as we put ourselves into touch with controls over life. Too many of us are like the little ship that's portrayed by Khalil Gibran in his little book, The Prophet. You'll remember when he's talking about reason and passion, he says, reason is the rudder of the ship, and passion is the wind in the sails. As I look at American society today, it seems that we're moving towards two extremes. We have people who are almost totally and completely incapable of action because they don't know where they're going, and they have no concept of direction whatsoever. They have all of the intellectual desire to open up the possibilities and to utilize their brains to give them direction if they could only find the direction in which they ought to be going. But because they're not sure of anything, they hold back. They will make no commitments. And the lack of commitment and the lack of control of their own existence begins to push in on them, and they become less and less capable of committing themselves to anything. The pop singer and writer who spent 3 years in bed because he didn't dare get out of bed, because he was so frightened of the day, is not an atypical example. Show me what to do and I'll do it. But the truth of the matter is, one knows that one will not do because it takes a certain drive. On the other hand, we have people who are running willy-nilly, doing things over and over, fast, go, go, because they think that for no other reason, if they're somehow active, they're accomplishing something. They never stop to pause and ask, what am I accomplishing? What am I doing in my life? And is it worthwhile? But they're doing it. Fast, go. Somehow or another, the more you do, the more it's all important. And they lack the intellectual rudder. And so they're like a ship that's moving with the winds and the gales and being blown about at tremendous speed, but never accomplishing anything or going in any direction whatsoever because they don't have control. The one knows and points but doesn't move. The other moves but has no direction. The person who's got it together in the modern lingo is the individual who has the drive and the ability to make motion when necessary, but the intellectual control over his life to point the directions in which he ought to be going. That takes a certain understanding of life and the ability to establish priorities. For not everything is of equal value. Not everything is of lasting value, nor ought it to be. There are certain things I do for the sheer pleasure of the moment, and we all do those kinds of things. There is happiness and joy, which is just the sheer happiness and joy of being at that particular time. But when we're talking about the ultimates and the responsibilities of life, we're talking about a far deeper impact of life, and that is the impact of life that says to me, you have control over your destiny. It's time that you take the handle of that control and make your life what it ought to be. But how? We find operating within our life concepts and principles. And the first chapter of our little pamphlet called Finding Time deals with the understanding of life as being timed or timeless. We talk about two concepts of time. There are many. One of them is a linear concept of time where everything is marching along. We called it marching time in this little booklet. You're passing along through life. All things behind you are in the past and somehow stretching way out into God knows how far is the future, and we have a passing moment, the present time. And as we walk along, that passing moment seems to be continually fleeting, and we have no opportunity to enjoy the present time because we're always running to catch a future or worrying about what's behind us. It's a linear kind of a thing. We measure it by our clocks. We measure it by our calendars. I've been here for 6 years, I can say proudly, which tells you nothing about what I've done in this 6 years. Big deal. It may mean that you have put up with me for 6 years and there's no significance whatsoever other than the fact that for somehow or another, for 6 years we've lasted together. Because the one thing about that concept of linear time is it might tell sequence. I came on such a date, we did this on such a date, it's such a date now, but it doesn't say a thing about the significance of life. That's the crucial thing. Sequence is important, but it says nothing about significance. So we developed the idea of a different kind of time, which we called eventful time, time which is full of an event. And it centers around not a sequence of things, but centers around what has happened. We used a number of examples, but one I think is extremely important because it shows, before we move into, this is all introduction by the way, before we move into the full sermon itself. I am married. I can tell you almost to the hour and the minute when Chris and I met. I can close my eyes and I can see the circumstances. I can tell when we formally met. I can tell you when I fell in love with her, and then we met 6 months later. But she walked by, and I said, that's for me. That quick. She didn't even see me. I can tell you who I was with, where I was, everything else, okay? I can put it down. I can show you step by step how this whole jumbled thing came together and finally formed fit and worked out, you know? And that's marvelous. I can give you the sequence, but that doesn't tell you a thing about whether or not we have a good marriage, whether we're happy, whether we do things together, whether we share. All that tells you is how long we put it together. The important thing of a marriage is not how long it lasts, but what it means. Am I right? What's going on in it and how you understand it and what it's all about. To go through 50 years or 60 years or 70 years of torture and say, I've been married 75 years and we've hated every minute of it, says nothing. But to be able to put it together and understand it and know what it's all about is what's in there. The significant thing is that marriage fills the event. And the event itself is important more than the time. When you understand life and death, you begin to understand that the quality of the life is not measured by how long it's lived, by what's within it. Some of the most beautiful lives have been short lives, and some of the worst have been long. The quality of the life radiates out through. And the only thing when I've had those unpleasant, those shocking, those scary, those fearful opportunities of trying to understand why a young child is ripped from the very throng of their own life, the only thing I can understand is that the quality of a child's life is often so radiant that it's far more significant than the length. And so an event fills the time. And when you begin to understand eventful time, that is time which is filled with an event, you begin to understand once again and anew the importance and the ability that one has to establish priorities. For we develop in the first chapter the idea that not only that should time be full of the event rather than measured by length, but it ought to be an understanding of significant events. And a significant event in life is one which ultimately transforms my life. Now, eventful time is watching the Super Bowl, but it didn't do much for me. First of all, it was a bad game, from my point of view, since I'd like to have seen the Vikings at least play in the game instead of just standing out there watching them go by. Secondly, Well, it was a pleasant passing of the afternoon while I was reading and typing and watching and all. It didn't matter to me one hill of beans ultimately who won. Wouldn't change my life. Wouldn't change the way I approach things. Wouldn't change the way I would approach my son or my neighbors or my whole understanding. It was just a nice, pleasant event. But a significant event is an event which ultimately transforms my life in every aspect. It is an event which so makes me over that I see absolutely nothing in the same light as I did before. And the priorities of life are those which center upon the significant events of life that enable me to re-understand and to re-evaluate and to know that I'll be a different human being. Church is a significant event. Well, I talked about it with the junior highs in our little class, but I talked about it with my son, who decided that after 5 days of going to school, he did not need to go to school one more day. Now, it was a little bit of touch and go between you're going and don't bug me because I'm going to kick you in the rump if you don't go, and trying to understand why he didn't want to go to Sunday school. We ought to rename it Sunday School. School. Who wants to go to school? We talked about the fact that there is no place else in American society, although I didn't use those terms, that he can learn about why he is valuable and what's important in his life, except the home and the church. And you're going because it's important for you to know why and how and what. Church is a significant event. Now, all significant events have three things about them. First of all, they're in a sense timeless. That is, they don't really count upon when or they started or when they end. They go on. They happen. Immanuel Kant, the great German philosopher, talked about things like this. He didn't put it quite into these terms, but he used the word in German Geschehen, which is translated as occurrence. I don't like it. I like it happening. The kids talk about a happening. Now, what's the significant thing about a happening? It may be somewhat planned, but basically it happens. When it started and when it ends isn't important. It's the fact of the fact that it happened. So it's timeless. It moves on. It has its own ability to transform over a long period of time. Secondly, it's all-consuming. It is an event which totally transforms if it's significant. We use the time of mourning, and I don't want to go in too much on that because I think it's a good one, but there's some things that need to be expanded on it. The one thing about a period of mourning is it changes not only everything in your life, all of your relationships, all of your understanding of life, but for a period of time it absolutely turns you inside out. It consumes every single bit of your energies. Mental depression does the same thing. Mental depression is a significant event because it's not only timeless in one sense, but it's so all-consuming that you can't get outside of yourself. You become like an ingrown toenail, more and more sore and aching within your very soul, and you don't know how to get outside yourself, and you can't even think about anything outside yourself. And over a period of time, as you begin to handle these things and understand them and work them out, you begin to realize that a significant event is all-consuming, but having made the change, it can be broadened. And the last one I want to talk about is it's intensely personal, and this is something which people don't understand. A significant event is something which is so personal that only I can understand its significance for me. I joked about the Super Bowl. It was not a significant event for me. It was for the winners, and probably for the losers. It probably did change their lives. And I would be less than sensitive to the power of an event like that, playing before 120, 30 million people. The excitement, the capping of a career, if I did not recognize for some of those players, it probably is a significant event. And when I begin to understand that, I become less able to force upon people modes of action in order to show why the event is important to them. This is something I want to pause and really talk about for a moment. One of the things we have in society today is that you cannot be really, truly you without fear that somebody's going to misunderstand it. Things happen in our lives that completely tear us up, and somehow or another, in order to show it, we have to act out a certain way. If you want to show God in your life according to certain churchmen and certain preachers on television and so on, you can show it only by having one single kind of experience with God. You've got to walk the old traditional sawdust trail, and if you haven't done that, and if somehow a beam of light hasn't come down and hit you over the head, you've never experienced God in your life. That's the sign. Doesn't matter about what you're like inside. Go through the outward form, and you have an understanding of it, they say. Some people handle pain in various ways. People handle upset in various ways. And the one thing that we have to recognize is that when an event is significant in life, each one of us has his own way to work on it. I interviewed one people this morning, a woman who has written a book, How to Get It All Together When Your Parents Are Coming Apart. Next week's sermon's going to be on a sense of closure, how to know when something's over. Theologically, mentally, spiritually, and so on. The following week is going to be on that book, How to Get It All Together When Your Parents Are Coming Apart, because I think it's a profoundly interesting book. One of the things that the woman says is, regardless of what's going on between the parents, each individual adolescent has to go through a certain struggle within himself or herself and find the way of coping with the hostilities of a parental breakup. And that no one way will suit the needs of individuals. They must find their own way. Now, there's nothing more significant in the life of a child, from all studies being done, than that particular kind of an upheaval in life. And what we can do is begin to help when we understand the significant event and priorities, begin to help an individual, a child, a man, a woman, whoever, facing a crisis in their life, which is a significant event, which is all-consuming, which is turning everything inside out, to find their own way to cope and to get out of it. And to recognize when we do that, we're helping them to live their lives more fully. They don't have to cope like we do. Chris always says, I don't know how you can eat that. It really turns me off. I don't know how David can go out and play. It's so cold. I'd never go out, or I'd never do that. Well, we laugh about it because that's, in a sense, projecting to others what I would do. But we do it all the time. The way you react is your reaction. You don't have to react to please me. You have to react within your own soul and your own body. And as soon as you react to please me, neither one of us is being a real human being. You see what I mean? What we've got to do is recognize the depth of human experience and give people their own ability to move and to do and to ask. So as you begin to establish the priorities in life, you begin to establish a whole series of understandings about what is significant, what changes my life, and what brings about the changes. Those of you in the discussion groups will be opened up with questions like this. What other events in life may be described as eventful? Would you include marriage, divorce, having children, finding or losing a job? In what ways do these events change our lives? Do they change them for the good or the bad? Who decides and what decides if they are good or bad? How do we handle the events if they are good? How do we handle them if they're bad? When we look at these concepts of time, which is the more significant and important in our own lives? Do our churches meet us at the points of our lives where we meet events? Or do they focus on significant occasions or on some future point? The churches talk about the future and some about here and now. What's the difference between that? Do churches and do service clubs and organizations have meetings because meetings are expected or because there's something significant about what's going on? And with questions like that, as we begin to expand within our own horizons together, I think we're going to find, as the second chapter moves on to, that the most significant event in life is the reign of God in our own lives. So for the first Sunday in February, that will be the sermon topic, the second chapter in preparation for our ongoing study groups. But whether you're in a study group or not, or whether you're in a group that wants to talk and discuss or has the time to do it or not, seems to me that as you look at your own life, you have to begin to understand what are those things which have made changes, what are the things that have made good changes, and how can I cope with the things that are all-consuming for me. And under the power of God, and with the support of friends, and with the inner power of each of our own individual selves, we have the capability of reaching out to a newness of life, to transform the significant events and transform ourselves, to get rid of the things which are evil and bad and destructive, and to move forward with the things which are positive. It is not easy. It is terribly difficult. But it's only when we begin to do that that we recognize that a significant event in our lives is that event which is timeless, because it doesn't matter about sequence, it matters about significance. It's all-consuming because it entails our entire being to make it work the way it should. And it's intensely personal because nobody can judge for us what's going on. None of that is new. So the old spiritual says Jesus walked that lonesome valley. He had to walk it all by himself. Nobody else could walk it for him. He had to walk it by himself. If it stopped there, it would have been a theological truth. But the birth of the experience within went on to say, you must walk that lonesome valley. You must walk it by yourself. Nobody else can walk it for you. You must walk it by yourself.